My name is Rob van Eijken. I work at the House of the Dutch Provinces here in Brussels, and it's a pleasure to moderate this final round table. The question for this round table is towards borderless mobility for citizens? Question mark. When I heard earlier this morning Sabine Stock from Österreichischen Bahn, I would say it is not a question mark, but an exclamation mark. It's very well possible. It's very well possible to have borderless mobility. But then I was taken back by the fact, and Minister Herman also addressed it just before, that locks have to be changed. And then I thought, this sounds so 1900 century. But probably it isn't at all. Because at that time you had the Austrian-Hungarian Empire with a lot of cities in it which Mrs. Stock mentioned. And I can't imagine that in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire locks had to be changed. So what a drawback after more than 100 years. And another thing, own experience as a citizen traveling a lot through the border, being Dutch, working in Brussels, grown up in Breda, very near the Dutch-Belgian border. And for me, Flanders was not another country, no. Neighbors, but not another country. But in the last 2 years, there were even 8 months that I couldn't cross the border due to COVID. What a drawback. Well, where have we arrived today? Today we have arrived, we heard a lot of innovation, we heard a lot of good ideas, we heard a lot of possibilities, but are they already realized? I don't believe so. So, congratulations for the organization, Grand Est and Baden-Württemberg, for organizing this, because it brings people together, and that's where it starts. People have to work together. And I'm convinced after the former roundtable that Minister Herman and Minister Peters are going to meet much oftener and exchange what they are doing in their own regions, countries, part of Europe. But now, before introducing, well, you can already see who are sitting here, but we are going to start with a short introduction of the Federal Minister of Belgium for Mobility, Mr. Guilquinet. Mr. Guilquinet, may I ask you to take the floor?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Bon après-midi. Goedemiddag, iedereen. Très heureux de vous accueillir.
So it is a pleasure to welcome all of you here in Brussels, even if you are here if you've been here for a few days. So I am Mr. Guilquinet, Minister for Mobility of Belgium, and I want to start with a quick survey. Amongst all of you, who came from Belgium? Raise your hands. Who came from outside, from another country? Did you come with the plane? Raise your hand. With the train? With the car? With the bike? Well, congratulations for all these cyclists. You know that Belgium will be the chair of, will hold the presidency for the EU, and we hope to make it possible that 2024 will be the European year for cyclists, for bike. And we have a great plan for that. We have a plan. We have had it for 2 years. Today I will deal mostly with trains, because when talking about transborders connections, it seems like a very important topic for our territories, but also for Europe as a whole. Train is at the heart of the mobility policies of Belgium. It is indeed the spine for mobility in Belgium and for the mobility of tomorrow. We want to have more people with the train. We want to have more goods circulating through, and thanks to the trains, And on the national level, we have a package of measures for 2040 and for the rail system. We have negotiated with all the relevant stakeholders, so the rail companies, Infrabel, for instance, and SNCB, so which is basically the same as SNCF. So we signed a contract for 10 years on the 23rd of December of last year. Is the first time that we've had such a long contract, but we gave this historical partner the mission to transport the passengers. And with this contract, we have a plan of fundings on 10 years, guaranteed with Mr. Peters, and we will borrow money, fundings from the European Bank. And where there needs to be invested in to maintain our networks and to serve mobility as a whole. With all the relevant economic stakeholders, we have adopted a new plan, and our objective is to double the amount of goods transported with trains. Our objective is to make it easier to access our stations, our trains, that also to increase each year the number of trains circulating, so 10 years, additional 10% in 10 years. We want to have more passengers, we want to renew all our trains to make it more modern, more accessible, to support economy and to improve the compatibility between the transportation of goods and the transportation of passengers, of people. It is an ambitious goal, but it's an important goal given all the jams, the traffic congestion that we have in Belgium, which amounts to a lot of money because of lost time for companies. Indeed, if you are stuck in a traffic jam, well, you have no added value, and this is an economical stake. €1 invested in the rail network brings €3 to the real economy. It's also important for road safety. As every country, we need to improve road safety, and trains are a lot more safer than cars. It is also important for the climate. 30% of the CO2 emissions are linked to the mobility. And this part of this work was obvious, and much more obvious than the question of cross-border connections. We sometimes guarantee the mobility. We have investments, limited investments when we talk about national projects, but when it is about transnational projects, it's way more difficult. So we wanted to improve transnational connections. It's a very ambitious goal, and for this, it has the same reasons: congestion, road safety, climate, and so on, but it's much more difficult. Indeed, it requires cooperation, where rail network were meant to be incompatible because it made it possible, or it prevented countries from being invaded if they did not have the same road, the same rail infrastructure, rail network, with different gaps between the rails and everything. So we need to harmonize all the networks, and it is very difficult because the network is liberalized, and the rules are different than the rules that we have here in Belgium, because we have chosen the direct award, so a monopoly with historical service provider for rail networks. Another question is who should pay all that? Who should pay the maintenance? Who should pay the implementation of new facilities? Who should assume the costs of the new stations, the new railway networks? But we are working on it. Next week, here in Belgium, in Brussels, we will vote the first law of subsidies for night trains. We will cover the night trains, and even so, if the Austrian company shows the way or has paved the way for that, we wanted to do more. We have reached agreements with Luxembourg, for instance, to increase the efficiency of the connections between Brussels, Luxembourg, and further than Luxembourg, Strasbourg. I would like that the European Member of Parliaments take the train from Brussels to Strasbourg rather than a car or the planes. And we are working on these facilities, on this infrastructure, and a portion of the European money that we are granted is used to finance the facilities, the infrastructure. We also guarantee the daily connections. A lot of Belgian people work in the city of Luxembourg, and it is in another country, therefore. And just as we have a train surrounding Brussels or Paris, we have that in Luxembourg, between Arlon and Luxembourg. In the Netherlands, we are also working in the framework of a cooperation agreement signed in December. So we will have the three-landed train, so the train for 3 countries with regular connections between Aix-la-Chapelle, Maastricht and Liège. So it will be an efficient loop in collaboration with Areva. We're also working to support the transportation of goods and to reinstate the Trairix, so it's a connection between the Antwerp harbour and the other harbours in the Netherlands. And we want to create a rail connection in Belgium from Antwerp to the Netherlands. So we signed agreements with the Netherlands for that. We are also working with France, for example, for Valenciennes, with the project of RER, or of trains surrounding Lille, which will help us deliver more regular connections with Lille. It is also the case for the corridor, the European corridor. And to conclude, expectations are very high. Train is the most ecological, most efficient means of transport. And if we want to face the challenges of tomorrow, we need a more intuitive ticket system. If we want to create a European society of railway, and it will help us a lot. It will help us a lot if we were able to have common tickets for all the trains in Europe, with promotions for young people, older people, and this will help us build Europe if we are able to make it so that our citizens are able to get in the train and discover the beauties of our Europe. And this is the way we should follow. I feel like we need to go over the borders and use all the technology we have and that we need to discover. And this is often what I'm saying to the European Commission and to all the commissioners. Europe should be the driver in the return of railway. and in the return of trains to cross borders, and this will be the theme, the topic of our panel. Thank you very much.
Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Minister.
Of what's going to happen, and could be, of course, be a great example for others. Now, a difficult question from my side, because I'm not quite sure, as the Belgian system is so complicated, but are you in the European Council for Mobility?
Yes, I'm representing Belgium in the European Council.
Luckily, because it's not always the case. For instance, I believe for environment, yes. it isn't the case.
I have colleagues in the region in charge of mobility who are working together, but I'm representing Belgium in the European Council.
And being in the European Council for mobility, do you promote such a project?
Yes, every time I can, my colleague know me now after two or 3 years. Yes, I'm speaking with the colleagues about our law for night trains. I hope other countries will take such a law with a subsidy for train companies who are doing night train ride on our tracks, because we had 2 years ago a project from Sweden for a night train from Malmö to Brussels, and the difficulty for the operator was to find a level playing field to have price accessible for the people. And I think if each country does the same as Belgium to promote a night train, we can have a level playing field for a lot of companies, and there are a lot of people asking for the comeback of night trains in Europe, and it's such a success in Austria now. Then we can do the same and cooperate. We also ask, as Belgium, the European Commission, to promote the train, to help us to rebuild our train system, because in the 20 or 30 last year there was not enough investment in our system, and we have to rebuild it and to find the investment to do it. And it's the reason why we are working with the European Investment Bank and trying to find other solution to make the train back on track.
Thank you. Getting to our two members of the European Parliament, Anne Sander, Grand Est, Pascal Arimont from Eupen, if I'm well informed. You have the interesting combination with the Committee for Regional Policy, and you, Mrs. Sander, make the interesting combination being president of the Grand Est representation here in Brussels. So, question to you both: what gives being a Euro-parliamentarian in combination with these other functions within the Parliament, within a region? What would you say about the question towards borderless mobility? How far have you gone? Mrs. Sander.
Merci et bonjour à tous ceux que je n'ai pas encore vus depuis ce matin.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone that I haven't greeted yet. I wanted to say that this roundtable this afternoon on citizens' mobility is the roundtable that enables us to summarize everything we talked about today, because we've raised some concerns, some issues, difficulties, but I think that what we're doing at the European level for the mobility has always the same goal. Our goal is to facilitate the citizens' mobility and the citizens' life. So I think in this panel we are going to talk a lot about what we have already talked about this morning. So I have this double, maybe tribal function. I am an MEP, regional deputy in Grand Est, and president of Grand Est Europe. And I wanted to come back on what we are living, the situation in Europe, what we want to implement in terms of mobility, and everything we are talking about at the European level. When we talk about mobility at the European level, it's essential because it enables Europeans to know each other, to go study, work abroad, and create value. If we think about European construction, then trans-border regions have an important role to play because they are a small Europe, a laboratory for Europe. So it's important. At the EU level, we should focus on these trans-border regions that have a great unused potential for several reasons. And the first reason is that we lack regulation, because regulations are not the same between member states. It's the same case for the transport sector. We've talked about it. This leads to several difficulties for citizens' mobility. With Pascal Arimont, we work a lot about these topics because we were raised and we were born in trans-border regions and in border regions, and we always work in group on mobility in the EU Parliament. And it's the occasion to bring together different actors. And that's what I wanted to say. It's essential that the different actors collaborate, work together, the EU institutions, yes, of course, but also local, regional actors, regional authorities that have an important role to play for mobility, but also universities, companies, and civil society. So I'm now coming back on citizens' mobility. With these, all these functions that I have, I can work at different levels. We've talked this morning about missing links. Missing links in border regions. Missing links in rail transport. Because in these border regions, you need roads, because people will use their car a lot. And if every week you need to drive from Strasbourg through Brussels, so driving through France, Luxembourg, and Belgium, one way or another, it's complicated. So we need to talk about roads, infrastructures, yes. We've talked also about vehicles. We need greener cars, or the types of cars. But there's a topic that we haven't talked about today. It's these labels, ecological labels for cars, because every territory has its own label. So I'm not saying that we cannot use this label, but maybe in border regions we could use a new system of labels, of common labels. It would make sense. So cars, it's an important topic, but now with the price of fuels and because of the collective will that we have to work towards a greener planet, a greener transport, we need to work on missing links. The Parliament will vote tomorrow this TNT, so this network, European network of transport, and we have worked with all the actors, with the MEPs, local authorities, Grand Est-Europe, with universities and local authorities, and together we wanted to put forward these connections, local rail connections. And I think that for now it's positive, because I think they will vote for these rail connections tomorrow. But now member states have to work on this. They will need to act to support our actions on these missing links. I talked about rail connections. Of course, we need infrastructures. We need equipment, vehicles. But collectivities, local authorities have a role to play. In Grand Est, for years now, I think that the first time was in 2019, we made the decision to invest with the three German regions. We've invested in common vehicles, common trains. This will help citizens, but of course we need to organize transport as well. The region is working on it and has this competency, and we're working with these investments, and it's a real challenge because we want to facilitate these connections. We want to work on this transborder aspect, but it takes time because we need long-term investments. And yeah, that's where there's a difficulty, an issue, because citizens think that we're going too slow. We want fast trains and we want them now. So maybe I'll say just one last word. I talked about the need for investment and good organization of transport. We need also an appropriate price for the ticket. And we should think about it first in border regions. As an MEP, I'd like to be able to go back home with a single ticket, European ticket, that would work in every member state. It's still complicated. Maybe we should first experiment it in border regions. One last word, an essential one, on economic activity. I was talking about citizens' mobility, but for our economic activity and with our single market, these trans-border economic activities are essential. And I think that we also need investment on this. Big investments, of course. Then we come back on trains and trucks. Rules are not the same when you cross a border. You cannot have the same weight of goods in the trucks, for example. And we also talked about inland navigation on Rhine. And we can see that because of climate change, we can see that there is less water in rain, and so we can in the rain, so we cannot use this river as much as we should. And so this means that we need to act on every level, and every level of decisions should take part in it. Thank you very much, Mr. Arimont.
Thank you for being able to be here today, and thank you also for being able to talk in German. I come from one of the most beautiful regions in Europe, and this is the German-speaking region in Belgium. Perhaps I would also like to be an advocate for those who do not live in larger cities and who do not have a transport network available just in front of their door. I myself live in a small village, and I come to Brussels with my car, and I actually leave at 5 a.m. Since I would like to avoid traffic jams. Those who live in the village where I live, they actually ask themselves one question: what is the job that I can do? And in a cross-border area where I live, just 10 kilometers from Germany, just a few kilometers from France, and also around 50 kilometers from the Netherlands, this job is usually based at the other side of the border. And fortunately, this is no longer a problem, and we have a large group of people in our area that every day travel to another country to be able to work. At the moment, they don't do that with a train or with a bus, they use their car, and this is usually the only possibility they have, and therefore the car is usually vital for them. And the discussion that we used to have on electrification of cars, this is something that actually hits these people quite hard, since they actually face problems that sometimes in Brussels you cannot see. But the question is, how can we achieve cross-border mobility? And I can perhaps provide an example. Mr. Minister, I am very glad that you said that trains and buses have to be designed in a cross-border manner. This is something that we haven't had for 20 years. I remember that as a member of parliament, I also visited Tech. At some point, the bus operator Tech, there is a bus that connects Aix-la-Chapelle and Eupen, and you do not just pay €1 or just €1 if you travel in Belgium, or €1 in Germany, since 2 organizational companies organize this trip. And this is the public transport system in Aix-la-Chapelle, and therefore people actually have to pay €12. And obviously for a student, this is not affordable. And these are the small things that don't work, since transport for 20, 30, 40 years has been thought of at a national level. And we have been talking about interoperability of systems. I also know in Eupen of the fact that a diesel locomotive actually has to pull trains back to Aix-la-Chapelle because they cannot work with them otherwise, since they don't have a technology that is compatible. And this is actually unthinkable if you think that we are in the country of 2023, and we have been talking about the fact that train braking systems have to be adapted to one another for 20 years. And now we are talking about the digital ticketing system. If you try to travel across borders, and as a student or employee would like to take a bus in order to travel to another country, you usually have to buy 2 tickets. And this is something that if you tell that to someone who usually can cross a border quite simply, they will not understand that, since they only have to travel for 5 or 10 kilometers. But the ticketing system is different in the other country, and therefore you have to buy 2 tickets, and therefore these people rather use car transport since it is easier. And I can understand them, since the car is something that they can use quite easily. They don't have to go through any checks, and they can just arrive there quite easily. And when during COVID the borders were closed, people actually did realize what it means to have checks, to have border controls when this actually happened. In my opinion, these border closures were not only unnecessary but also illegal. But this actually provided some consciousness of the fact that people do no longer want to have those borders. And therefore, it is very important to follow this thought. And as a transport minister, you just talked about the fact that we have to talk at a level of cross-border. And when I visited Tech, as I just mentioned, and I talked to him about the Interreg project, and they didn't want to participate in the Interreg project. And he said, well, we think it's a great project. We would like to do that, but we don't have any money in order to fund buses in Belgium. How are we supposed to do any things that go beyond borders? And if I have to decide between a new bus line between Verviers and Liège or a cross-border bus line, I'm going to always decide on the bus line in Belgium. And our transport ministers, both at regional or national level, for them, it is important to always think of all of these aspects for people in border regions. Because otherwise the problem, all of these challenges that I just talked about are going to hold us back. And it is about, with the Interreg program, it is about repairing all of these things. And this is what I'm going to talk about now. As a rapporteur, I have also been involved in this project. And when I see that the project EMR Connect, which I think is a milestone with regards to cross-border mobility and also implementing this cross-border mobility, I think we have to try in all of these programs to balance out all of what we haven't done in the past. And I think this is rather important. And I think we should tackle all of these challenges in that manner. This is something that is still lacking, that usually only one side is being taken into account. And when we talk about today's problems, then it is also about the Interreg project, for example, with regards to the next type of transport of buses that use electricity, e-buses, and they are supposed to travel across borders. And then you actually realize that the electricity system in Aix-la-Chapelle is a different one from the electricity system in Eupen, and this is usually a challenge as well. And it is shocking to have to deal with all of these problems in the year of 2023, and we still have to raise the questions, why do we implement two different systems? And therefore I am glad that the European Union also, through legal texts, to actually anchor the term interoperability. And if we do carry out these investments, we should always introduce equal systems. Apparently with regards to electricity, this is not yet the case, but I think the efforts that we have to take when living in a border region, it is always about explaining to people it would be better if you traveled by train than by car, but the response that we're going to get is that it is still easier to travel by car. I am very grateful for all of these projects. My previous colleague Peters is here to also fund all of these projects, and the European Union is already funding quite a lot of these projects. We are going to vote on a 10T tomorrow. A lot of money is being invested already, but for those living in rural areas, it is important to increasingly do so. Otherwise, they are not going to move away from their cars. I'm living close to the border with Luxembourg, and a lot of people travel to Luxembourg every day, and there is not a single alternative to car travel. They have to use their car. If we had an RER system or a local train system to Luxembourg, that would be an alternative, but it is not available, and this is something that we have to construct. And I would advise that we think about that, because then we would help rural areas such as mine, and then the transport would be something rather natural. But unfortunately nowadays it is not the case yet.
Und Sie haben, Herr Gilkin.
Thank you very much. And you gave Guinea a new project, yeah. And I remember that Herman van Rompuy once said, to bring Europe further together, we need some crisis. So, okay, I don't know if that works like that. Okay.
A region which is historically known for so many centuries already, Alsace, as being a border region, one way or another. Frédéric, your experience, please.
Oui, merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I need to go back home. I need to take the subway and the train because we have not talked about one problem today, strikes, and it can lead to some difficulties for our citizens and people that live on a border. When I was young, I had an aunt living in Strasbourg, close to the border, and I remember that we would go out with the dog and we would see the border and be a bit concerned about it. There was still controls at the time at the border, and we were a bit. We felt anxiety about this border, and with Europe, we were able to open borders. And I didn't think I would see borders there again, but you've said earlier that with COVID, we've seen borders again, and maybe there will be another health crisis or a military crisis, and we can see that we need to work closer together between border regions to avoid having the same situation as during COVID again. We have cooperations between with Switzerland, for example, that can have an impact on mobility. So the law and the when we talk about borders is also something that we need to talk about. And since we are citizens living close to the borders, we need to see what our citizens are doing on a daily basis. Thousands of citizens are traveling from their home to their workplace every day, and they need to cross the border with and we need to offer them transport opportunities. But nowadays, students, for example, cannot travel to give all its university that we are so proud to work on this mobility. In Alsace, we're talking about and I've been this since for 50 years, and we've not been border level. Another aspect here is tourism as well. We want to connect castles on the Rhine because in these border regions we have a lot of castles, maybe the highest rate of castles in the world. So how can we help tourists to travel from one castle to another? I think it's a question of transborder proximity, but we're not only working at the local level. We also want to work on business travels and a European capital city. We want to be sure that we can work on this aspect as well. And we've seen that It's not that difficult, but we have this high-speed train starting from Paris, going to Strasbourg, Germany, and then can go to Italy. And we just lack 6 kilometers. And for years, we've been talking about these 6 kilometers that we need for this connection. We also have airports, big airports. We have trains between cities in Germany. We can make train connections to airports, and maybe we could just have one common airport between Baden and Heysam. I'm looking at the minister here, but maybe that's something we could work on together, because it would enable us to not compete with each other, but to work with each other and to improve this accessibility. Katrin talked about it this morning, but we can see that Karlsruhe's port is full now, and you have another port of the city of Strasbourg close by that could help with the situation. So here we need to work on these connections between the two ports. So we have these missing links that seem easy to correct, but we need to have the will to do it. For example, in France, we had this Durand report, and this report was saying things as if across the border it was not Germany or the Rhine, but the sea. Nowadays we're talking about the connection Paris-Lyon-Turin, but not about Paris, Strasbourg, Germany, Turin, Lyon-Turin. And I think that we should really tell our government that they should see the possible connections while taking into account these trans-border opportunities. At the EU, of course, we can take important decisions like the one that will be taken tomorrow. And it makes sense because it will empower these kind of projects that we've already talked about, Karlsruhe to Lauterbourg, for example. So there is a real potential here. These projects are essential, and they also give a European perspective to citizens living at the border. We can also bring European investment, and we need to simplify everything, every procedure. It's something that we need to work on. When talking about mobility, of course, we are talking about the rail industry, and it's essential. Everyone talked about it here. The rail industry has a great potential, but we should still talk about cars, because nowadays, when someone drives a car, is alone in the car. Oh, so you're 3 people in your car, so perfect. But most of the time, there's only one person in the car. And I think that we need to raise awareness on this. We need to find trans-border BlaBlaCar. I think that young people are more used to this kind of things than us. And it would enable us to go further into this shared mobility. I wanted to talk about bikes also. We have in Alsace we have a lot of roads for bikes, 4,000 kilometers. But at the transporter level, most of the time we need to cycle a few kilometers to go to work, and This means that it's hard to cycle there, even if we have an e-bike. So that's what I wanted to say. I'm sorry, I need to leave you now. But at least there will be one less people talking here. So thank you for inviting me and for our exchanges and discussions. Thank you.
Et bon retour. Jean-Claude Meyer, Deputy Union. The Benelux Union often is referred at as a pilot area. A lot of European projects started in the Benelux Union as a pilot to find out how it will work. How can that be? What is your explanation for your success as Benelux Union?
Merci beaucoup. D'abord, merci pour cette invitation.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. As you've mentioned, Benelux Union has been created more or less at the same time than the European Union. So basically, we introduced in the European Union Treaty an article that is still valid today, which is that the three countries can still continue with their cooperation as long as the objectives that are set are not achievable through the EU. Which means that if we want to go further into integration, we can. If we are satisfied with what the EU is doing, we can do just nothing. So we have this opportunity to be at the forefront of the EU in some ways. But this explains also the fact that today we have a lot of meetings, we have a lot of observers to get to know from one another. What is the role as a forefront then of the Benelux Union? Well, we have projects. Benelux Union is a little bit more intergovernmental than the EU, so we propose IDs and then it's up to the member states to implement these IDs if they want to do so. For instance, for the projects that will be implemented in 2023, it's the project of bikes. Mr. Mollema told that for 2024 there will be the European Year of Bikes. In 2022 there has been the Convention for the European Convention for Bikes, and the objective is that next year will be the European Year of Bikes. So we can have more ideas to implement new projects for bikes. On that basis, Benelux and other regions surrounding the Benelux, indeed we have some objectives that cannot be achieved just with us three. We need other regions surrounding us, and we therefore look what the regions have been doing for the bikes, and we are looking at this on a transnational sense. On that matter, you will find more information on the roadmap on the stand Benelux at the entrance of this room. And a representative said or asked, what could we do more? Well, you just have to look at the roadmap, and maybe we can include the region Grand Est as well. Now we have a project which is the digital coupling. So we want to have all the road infrastructure from Benelux and have all the data about that. And using this data, we can decide where we want to have new charging points for EVs. And the objective is to have every 80 kilometers to have a charging point for EVs and for vehicles working with hydrogen. And we want to know how to make it possible in our territory. We also have another project in the Benelux, because each charging point needs to have a reference number. And therefore, rather than having 3 different systems, we have one unique, one single system. So every society, every company who wants to use these charging points can just register near us and can have the opportunity to offer chargers to electric vehicles. Another point is the document for charging, which goes perfectly into the European works to harmonize the logistics sector. Another important project is the project MAS. It's not linked to the beer MAS, but it's more of the mobility as a service. Can we make sure to have more transport systems with just one ticket? If I want to go from Luxembourg to Antwerp or to the sea, I need to buy a bus ticket and then a train ticket and then a bus ticket. It's just too long. Can we make it possible to have just a single ticket for everything? For now, we are in the process of feasibility studies because it asks a lot of questions. How to have the data for that, how to define the right price between each operator, because for each country we have one company dealing with all the rail network, and if you want to integrate also the bus network, it means a lot more stakeholders, so it's a lot more difficult. So these are a few projects, and we also have other activities. For instance, rail networks. We have different systems between each country. Member states have asked us to look at how we can make sure to have a unstopped connection for 5G, because we are convinced that transport will be more digitalized in the future. So we need more equipment, more facilities to make sure that it is possible. For instance, if you cross the border and you do not have 5G anymore, it will lead to a lot of problems. And if you want to have more information, you can find everything at the stand Benelux.
Multimodal digital mobility services as being an example of that. And that brings me to Jean-Pierre Alquin. As introduced, Head of Unit Interreg Cross-Border Cooperation, Internal Borders. A lot of Interreg projects have taken place, and I always wonder, is it being shared enough? The information that comes from Interreg projects, do we all over Europe know what the results of these Interreg projects are? One question. Other question is, what does the European Commission, what does DG Regio do or can do with the results of the Interreg projects coming from ground, giving a lot of practical information? So, Mr. Alquin, I would like to ask you to give us an insight. How does it work? How can we benefit from all these Interreg projects? And a lot of suggestions have been made this afternoon for new Interreg projects. And what is the perspective for that? What are the new Interreg possibilities? Monsieur Alquin.
Merci beaucoup. Tout d'abord, je voudrais...
Thank you very much. So it is a real pleasure to be here today. In the previous meetings, previous roundtables, we have dealt with Interreg projects in a very positive manner. Everything is not perfect, we know that. For instance, there is the problem of administration, it's very complex. But generally speaking, the image that has been given to the projects of Interreg is positive and very positive. I don't think I'm very objective on that matter, but I feel like the spread of our results is not sufficient. Our studies have shown that the collaboration between member states is linked to an increase in requests from the citizens. We have numerous projects, for instance, the cross-border projects, about which we told this morning and right now. And another project is linked to longer distances projects. So, for instance, the projects that are aiming to strengthen the mobility policy for the upcoming years and decades. I've spent most of my career in the external relation part of the political world, and when I joined DG Regio and when I worked on these projects, I found that there is a lot of enthusiasm. We are curious about what the others are doing, how to discover new things. Another very important point is the mindset and the openness of Interreg towards new ideas. And we believe that to achieve Europe, to overcome all the challenges, we need to build confidence between European stakeholders. And this is the key. And this helped to promote the... this explains why Interreg has such a good image. We have great initiatives, for instance, the participation of young people in our projects. Young people have decided to draft a manifest by and for the young people, which does not exist for the rest of the cohesion policy. So, when we live in a cross-border region, we are more sensibilized to the fact that Europe is still in a work in progress, basically. And this is how I see the projects of Interregio for today. For tomorrow, so starting in 2022, and which will end up in 2027, 2030. Well, the projects are there to accompany the great policies of the EU. So we have 5 policy goals, which are the same then as the cohesion policy, the cohesion goals. So, for instance, smarter Europe, a greener Europe, a more connected Europe with transport and digital networks, which is not often dealt with in the Interreg projects. We also want to lead a more social policy and closer to the citizens, which is an innovation for a period 2022 and 2027, is very important for the topic at hand today, is a better governance for cooperation and a safer Europe, which is a very hot topic for the areas that are at the border of Europe, at the external borders. What do we mean by better cooperation? Mainly in the cross-border regions. So to echo the what Gilkine, Mr. Arimont Meyer and Miss Anne have said, we need to conceive a new policy. And that is very important because it's a revolution in policy. We want to have a greener transport which benefits from all the technologies, and that these policies benefit all the citizens and not 2/3 of the citizens. And the third, citizens that do not often these projects are the people that are near the borders, and they, or at least they benefit less from the policy because of, well, the borders. Near to a border, we do not live part of a country. We do not have access to the job market, the same schools, the same hospitals, So we need to single market, and for that is essential, and mobility needs to be a framework of in which the countries are not member states. We need to see it integral part of the EU and not just one. And that's especially the case when we live in Open. We want decided in Germany, in Luxembourg. It is very important, more important to know when we live in Open in Luxembourg or in Germany than what has been decided without any prejudice to the company. Yeah. So we need a mobility which helps the people living in cross-border. This is really an opportunity that's by all the stakeholders, massive investment for Interreg Point 1. It shows an observatory of the transnational areas, so these are considered with borders, and the objective is that it will lead to a better governance without prejudice to the national. So we have structures between one member state and the other, different, but the interest about it. And we see that have already improved on that. For instance, in Germany, have been taken to improve the situation. Another point is what's without the fundings. So if an legal obstacle overcome, we've talked about that a lot today with the label. If in a cross-border area we have network, and moreover, besides, even more difficult to use the car because they are low emission areas. This problem, and we want this aspect in our thoughts process, and we hope that a topic that will take more and more importance. We will come back a draft project, a regular draft, aims to overcome obstacles. So we are revising, we negotiate, and the financial not to everything. There is the logistics to be considered. Thank you very much.
Well, questions? Probably, but yes.
Sorry, John Worth, once more. Two closed a cross-border railway in 2022. That Mons in Belgium and Aulnoy in France, right? So between Belgium and France, the cross was closed. Let me just take some examples. Border in cross-border rail. There is no open the De Panne to Dunkirk line. On Kortrijk to Lille is worse than the timetable on Tournai to Lille a decade ago, and the trains don't go as far as Namur. The high-speed line between Brussels and Lille has a timetable than it used to have. There is no opening the line between Givet and Dinan. Gilles Quinet, you tell us that cross-border doing a lot to improve those matters. To Belgian border, you let one line completely close, and there is a worsening on pretty much all of your other cross-border connections. Should we actually trust what you say, that you really rail in Europe?
Even this is a challenge, Mr.
Question. Effectivement.
So indeed, the link between has been discontinued because it's very frequented, but the Charleroi-Maubeuge has been strengthened. It is, as far as timetable goes, the connection between is not really private operator has decided the quality of the service between Brussels. This shows how it is to connection between two stations. Here in EB and within the framework contract, where it is said that there is all the connections, the internal connections, but also connections. Arlon-Luxembourg, Liège. And I want to strengthen that. I am to strengthen it with the Triland de Train, the old project, and I am proud to have to make it a reality. We had two. First of all, difficulty in terms of operative. We had material with from, and there was a problem of homologation for the three networks. It will be resolved. Another, how to share the revenues, the deficits of this reality. We talk a lot about the first and last mile. We are talking about mobility and goods transportation. I want to play a mediator for everything linked to border areas, because Mr. Arimont has said, we are Belgian, we feel Belgian, but we are as what is happening in Germany, as we are interested as what is happening. The France Echo, which is the speaking newspaper, deals with issues of Belgium and Germany. We are going to school in Germany, and it is the same in the province of. Many of them go to, and we had discussions about that for 3 years. I'm sure that train is the mobility of tomorrow, and we find allies. And I want to have national institutions that are in border areas, because borders for purpose, democratical purpose, but when we are living in this cross-border area, we are living in a different world, in two countries at the same time, to make it easier to connect but we need to make. I know that you talk a lot about the closure of. I read every, and I want to tell you your questions here today. But objectively, 50 passengers every day. So I took the decision to strengthen and to increase the frequency of the other line. living in the province of Namur, it is easier to the center of France and to use speed trains. For Mons, difficult. I want to find new deals. Talk about that with my we both need our interest in that and need a third party, which can be Europe, should be Europe. With the subsidies should help the overcome all the technical and difficulties. Today we have more trains in Belgium than it was before, because we have an efficient connection and we want to invest on this connection. The railway network was naturally, but there is still work to do.
To defend the minister, but in not just erase or do what happened in years. And I do believe him when he says that he invested in traffic and that he create a system to solve. My dream would be if we met in 20 and if we had a similar system. I have seen Europe, this is not the system for e-scooters, an app, and you actually pay once. Who are using these e-scooters themselves a number of questions. They can actually use those e-scooters in a number of countries. And if we had a similar system in 20 years' time, I think that would be interesting. But we have to work to a European response, whether you're traveling by train, by bus or e-scooter. You had one solution that could be funded and that could be distributed across the member states, and whether you use a tram or a train or a bus in Strasbourg, you would just have to ask yourself which mode of transport you would like to use. But I think we have to change the way of thinking at national level to create this European idea.
Of this round table. I would say including an applause for all the panelists of this round table, please. And that brings us to the final part of this program of this afternoon for the conclusions and perspectives. May I ask Minister Herman, the heer Peters, and Monsieur Leroy to come to the podium.